As Christmas approached in 1990, 20-year-old Linae Tiede and her 16-year-old sister Trish could barely have been happier. They were about to gather with their loved ones to spend the festive season at a cabin in the mountains that their family owned in Utah. Situated in Weber Canyon near Oakley, it was more than 2 miles off the road and nicknamed Tiede's Tranquillity for the peace and solitude it offered. Indeed, so remote was its location that it could only be reached by snowmobile during the winter. Linae recalled in interview hours that her mother Kaye Tidwell Tiede, 49, and her grandmother Beth Tidwell Potts, 70, had made the cabin the picture of Christmas coziness inside. "My mom even had our Christmas stockings hung under the fireplace mantel," she said. Crossing paths with evil. On December 22, 1990, the family left the cabin to finish some last-minute Christmas shopping in Salt Lake City. Little did they know that while they were gone, 2 men named Vaughn Lester Taylor and Edward Stephen Deli had broken in. Taylor and Deli were parolees who had gone on the run from a halfway house when they were supposed to be job hunting more than a week earlier. Deli had been in prison for 5 years for arson in 1989, while Taylor was doing a 15-year stretch for aggravated burglary. Now they were inside the Tiede's cabin, and Taylor had called a friend and told them he planned to shoot some people. Unaware of the danger that lurked inside, Linae, Beth, and Kaye reached the cabin first at around 3:30 p.m. They trudged in through the snow, put down their belongings, and started trying to get warm again after the long trip outside. It was then that the home invaders chose to strike. From behind the refrigerator came a frizzy-headed man in a gray sweatshirt with his pistol pointed at me. As soon as my mom came to the top of the stairs, out from the back bedroom, another robber with really thick Coke bottle glasses on was pointing a gun at my mother, Linae said. Without hesitation, Taylor shot Beth and Kaye dead. When Kaye started to pray before she was shot, Taylor allegedly told her it would do her no good because he worshipped the devil. Terrified and traumatized, Linae nonetheless tried to get the attackers out of the cabin as quickly as possible to protect her father, Rolf, and little sister, Trish. They were still on their way up the mountain somewhere behind, blissfully unaware that their little slice of heaven had already turned into hell. But despite her best efforts, it was too late. As Rolf and Trish pulled into the driveway, the 2 men apprehended them at gunpoint and dragged them into the cabin, where Rolf saw to his horror that his eldest daughter was already captive. My dad could see tears in my eyes, and it was an unspoken communication, and he knew at that point that something awful had happened to Mom and Grams, Linae recalled. As the sisters watched, one of the men pulled out his gun. Although it misfired twice, the 3rd shot hit Rolf straight in the face, and he crumpled to the ground, where the intruders doused him in gasoline and set him alight. Into the freezing mountains. After leaving Rolf for dead, the attackers covered the cabin in gas and set that alight too. Then they made the 2 girls load the snowmobiles and drive them away through the snow, 1 man on each vehicle, to ensure Trish and Linae did what they were told. At this point, someone in a cabin nearby had heard the gunshots and looked out to see 2 snowmobiles fleeing into the distance before calling the authorities. Frantic with fear and suspecting they would probably be murdered themselves once the 2 killers got to the road, Trish said she was trying to come up with a way of escaping. "I had all kinds of different plans of how to wreck the snowmobile, how to throw him off into a tree, how to get rid of him, but all I could think of is I couldn't leave my sister. There was no one to help us. There was nowhere to go," she commented. Then, Trish and Linae saw someone they knew. their uncle, Randy Zorn. He had spotted the snowmobiles and was waving at his nieces, assuming they were taking some friends for a ride. But in an incredible display of bravery, the girls maintained their speed and swept by, completely ignoring him. I knew his life could be in danger. I knew if these men knew Randy was our uncle there, that they would have killed him, Linae explained in her interview. Taylor and Deli took Linae and Trish to the family car by the road and forced them into the back. As the two men pulled away, they again saw Randy, and again the young women pretended they didn't know him to spare his life and suggested it was simply a neighbor being friendly. A minor miracle and a frightening chase. As Randy stood in the wake of the Lincoln, wondering what was going on, he was about to get a bigger shock. A snowmobile buzzed into view, and on it was a man with no coat, gloves, or other warm clothing, and a face covered in blood. It was Rolf Tiede. Recalling the sight of his brother by the 48 Hours interview, Randy said, "His face is just huge and full of blood, and just big. Eyes swollen shut, blood cycles, 'cause it was cold. He was in really bad shape, and he says, 'I've been shot. My wife has been killed and my daughters have been taken.'" Rolf had somehow survived being shot in the face, doused with gasoline and set alight. He had struggled to the bathroom to tear off his burning clothes before jumping onto a snowmobile in a desperate attempt to rescue his two girls. Randy bundled a bleeding and seriously ill Rolf into the back of his car and scrambled into the driver's seat. In another miracle, at a time when not every vehicle was equipped with them, Randy had a cell phone that he was able to use to contact 911. While on the line, he caught up with a Lincoln containing Trish and Linae and was able to give directions to the Summit County Sheriff's Department that was now also in pursuit. A terrifying 90-mile-per-hour chase ensued before the attackers lost control and the car tumbled from the road down an embankment. Mercifully uninjured, Trish and Linae put up their hands and yelled that they were hostages as police surrounded the vehicle and fired at the two men who had held them captive. At last, Taylor and Deli surrendered. Vaughn Lester Taylor, 25, and Edward Stephen Deli, 21, were each charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of taking girls. They were also charged with a theft, arson, and failure to heed a police signal to stop. Trial and aftermath. In May 1991, Taylor pleaded guilty to the murder charges and was sentenced to death at a penalty phase hearing 2 weeks later. In a separate trial, Deli was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Although both Trish and Linae testified, Rolf's presence in the courtroom was a real trump card for the prosecution. I remember watching the look on Deli's face as he came in seeing my father, and it was very apparent to me that he did not know my father had survived, and the look on his face was just priceless. Like he had been defeated. My dad survived. We won, Trish said. Deli wrote to Linae back in 2001, saying he is no longer the boy who committed the crimes, and after intense deliberation, she forgave him for what he did. However, she insists this does not mean she has forgotten his heinous crimes or feels he should walk free. As for Taylor, he has pursued a number of appeals against his death penalty, including 3 in front of the Utah Supreme Court. He continues to argue that the murder victims were killed by Deli's .44 Magnum, not his .38 Special, and that he was surprised when his companions started shooting. He has even claimed he should be spared because he may have brain damage. However, Linae and Trish insist this does not wash with them, pointing out that the two intruders had sat in the cabin and videoed themselves opening Christmas presents as they lay in wait for the family to return, rather than simply robbing them and leaving. There was a shock decision by U.S. District Court Judge Tina Campbell in 2020 to overturn Taylor's death sentence because he was not given an adequate defense from his public defender. But this was reversed in 2021 by a federal appeals court to place Taylor back on death row. Today's ruling puts Taylor back on the road to justice. Sadly, it does not end the case and permit Taylor's immediate execution, the Associate Press quoted Assistant Solicitor General Andrew Peterson as saying. Regardless of what happens to Taylor and Ellie, Trish and Linae have refused to let the events of that December afternoon in 1990 define them. The Tieds ensured the cabin in the mountains was rebuilt and that the family made new memories there after it rose from the ashes of the fire that engulfed it. Rolf passed away from cancer some years later, and both girls still call him their hero. But this is one story in which it's clear that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. In the end of this video, don't forget to push like and subscribe video for supporting us to make more content.